On April 29, 2017, Leon County deputies responded to a report of a skull found in the 2000 block of Road 145 on the west side of Neosho Rapids, Kansas, on the banks of the river. The witness that found the skull said that he walked to the river to see how high the water had risen from recent rain when he noticed the skull. More remains were found inside a fitted bedsheet and comforter inside a lawn trash sack, as well as a digital watch. The sack was tied at the top, but animals had torn into the bag to access the remains. Leon County Sheriff's detectives also responded to the scene and took over the investigation. After the autopsy was conducted, it was found that the man lived with scoliosis as he had a curve in his spine. It was also discovered that the man was middle to late aged, with a height of 5 foot 5 inches, and that he likely lost his life between 2013 and 2016. The cause of his demise was unclear at the time. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System 4 months later, in August 2017. Despite extensive efforts and the submission of forensic evidence to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for DNA analysis in 2018, the identity of the deceased remained a mystery. Over the years, Detective Sergeant Travis Mishler of the Leon County Sheriff's Office said, detectives diligently worked to identify the Neosho Rapids John Doe. Leon County deputies started working with Othram in 2022, 5 years after the human remains were found. That partnership developed new leads for law enforcement to follow, and in March 2024, Leon County detectives contacted a possible relative of the unknown man. That resulted in them finally identifying the man as Randy Bruce Clayton. Randy was born on October 12, 1953. He was from the Phoenix, Arizona area and lived in Oklahoma. Randy was never reported missing. Colby Lacioni, Director of Operations at Othram, said the following: I think it is important for people to not give up hope. The technology is here and available to help resolve cases such as this. And, the number one barrier at this point is funding, and that is changing. If folks want to support and are not able to financially, advocacy is very important. Advocating for new and different technologies to help bring resolution in these types of cases is very helpful and important. The investigation into Randy's case continues. If you have information that could help provide justice, contact the Leon County Sheriff's Office at 620-341-3205 or Kansas Bureau of Investigation at 785-296-8200. On January 24, 1985, a truck driver discovered the remains of a woman on Highway 78 in Olive Branch, Mississippi, just east of the Coldwater Bridge. She had been strangled with a ligature. The woman's shoes, undergarments, and jacket were missing. Through its investigation, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office determined the deceased to be a female weighing approximately 110 pounds, standing 5 foot 3 inches tall, and somewhere between the ages of 20 and 35 years old. They noted that she had red to blonde hair, 3 small piercings in each ear, tattoos on the inside of both ankles, and a surgical scar on her left forearm. No other identifying characteristics could be determined for the woman, and she was classified as a Jane Doe. The case went cold for 39 years. That was until 2022, when the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office and the Mississippi Office of the State Medical Examiner received funding from Carla Davis, a Mississippi native and philanthropist who is committed to helping resolve the backlog of cold cases in Mississippi, to send forensic evidence to Othram to see if there was a match for the remains. The Sheriff's Office have also reviewed multiple accounts from people claiming that the Jane Doe might have been a missing relative. Leads were investigated and ruled out by DeSoto County's crime scene technician and evidence clerk Amber Edlin. Finally, Othram was able to match the body's DNA in March 2024, nearly 40 years later. A relative, the woman's brother in California, was contacted. The woman was then finally identified as Lorie Ann Mueller Pennell. Lorie Ann was born in Missouri on September 6, 1962. This means that she was only 23 years old when she lost her life. She had been seen days before her disappearance at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Thereafter, her family filed a missing persons report, but she was never found. Lorie Ann's remains were buried at Blocker Cemetery in Olive Branch, inscribed with the name Jane Doe, January 24, 1985, the date her body was found. The Sheriff's Department says work will continue to find the person or persons responsible for the crime. We believe that justice has no time restrictions, the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department said in a press release. Therefore, we will relentlessly work towards locating the perpetrators so that they can be held accountable for their actions. On April 18, 1993, a biologist conducting a tortoise survey in the desolate area near Tropicana Avenue and Durango Drive in Las Vegas, Nevada, stumbled upon a chilling scene. Half buried in the dirt, concealed beneath several large rocks, lay a handmade quilt. Upon closer examination, the biologist noticed human hair and the unmistakable odor of decomposition. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, cold case investigator Terry Miller said, "The Clark County coroner determined the woman likely lost her life in mid to late 1991 from multiple gunshot wounds. Despite the investigative efforts of law enforcement, the woman could not be identified, and she became known as Jane Tropicana Doe. The case went cold." In February 2023, the Metro Police requested that Othram conduct a forensic genetic genealogy investigation of the remains. At last, after more than 3 decades, the LVMPD Cold Case Section identified the victim as Linda Sue Anderson, also known as Linda Sue Andrews. Linda's brother's DNA matched with the then unidentified victim. She was a 38-year-old mother of 3 at the time of her demise and stayed in Henderson, Nevada. Her family last heard from her during a phone call in 1991. Unfortunately, her children thought for all these years that their mother abandoned them due to her suffering from a mental illness, and therefore she was never reported as missing. Mikhail Kolishian, one of Linda's daughters, told the 8 News Now investigators, "So this whole time we were thinking that she left us and she did not love us. This is a huge thing in our lives." Linda was living with her husband in Henderson, Nevada, while her children were staying in northern Nevada with their father. "We called each other all the time on the phone," Mikhail said. But one day in 1991, Mikhail's stepfather told her and her siblings that their mother decided to leave and start a new life. He came home. Her stuff was gone, Mikkel said about that conversation. She left a note that she was starting a new life. She does not want anyone to go find her. Mikkel never saw the note, she said. A copy of divorce records filed in 1992 reveals her stepfather believed he last saw Linda in October 1991. Mikkel said she was told her mother was living a double life and having an affair. Everyone was just shocked, she said. They were like, I do not understand why she would leave her children. Linda would not do that. And then we were just like, well, she did. She left us. Mikkel said she hoped one day her mother would contact her. She never expected that call from Metro Police. To know that she had been slain, and we are wondering if she suffered, and we are wondering what she is thinking, and who did this to her. We do want to find answers. The hope now is that Linda's identification would lead to more information about who took her life. Anyone with information about Linda Sue Anderson or the events leading to her demise is urged to contact the LVMPD at 702-828-3521. Alternatively, anonymous tips can be submitted to Crime Stoppers at 702-385-5555. On July 19, 1972, a local teenage boy passing along through the area close to Withlacoochee State Forest in Hernando County, Florida, found the remains of a woman's body. It was in the area of High Corner Road and Cortez Boulevard in Brooksville. The victim was discovered wrapped in a bedspread with a distinctive pattern, possibly described as a pineapple damask print. The bedspread had 3 square corners and 1 rounded corner. Upon investigation, authorities concluded that the woman had been strangled 3 to 4 days before her discovery. She was about 5 feet tall, between 30 and 40 years of age, weighed between 125 and 145 pounds, with short brown hair and with just 6 upper and 6 lower teeth. At the time, investigators believed that the woman had traveled to Hernando County from either North Florida or Alabama. Details in the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs. Her case grew cold and became the oldest unsolved case in Hernando County. In 2015, the remains were exhumed for additional testing and to make a reconstruction. Isotope tests indicated that she had lived in the United States for at least 5 to 10 years and spent several years in Florida. Investigators then nicknamed her Edna, due to her facial features in the reconstruction. Detectives released the facial reconstruction made of clay to the public, hoping it would spur some tips. Then, in 2022, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office contacted Othram to seek assistance. On October 11, 2022, Michael Vaughan from Othram contacted HCSO Detective George Lloydgren with a possible name. Lloydgren was able to collect a reference sample from a possible member of the woman's family and submit it to Othram. In 2024, after 52 years, the remains were identified as Peggy Joyce Shelton, born in Kentucky on March 30, 1943. Peggy may have been seen alive a few days prior with 2 other individuals aside a white 1961 or 1962 Ford Falcon. The group was witnessed in the area exiting the vehicle and venturing into the woods, returning sometime later without one group member. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Peggy had connections to Hopkins County, Texas, before she lost her life. The case is still being investigated by Detective Loguercio in an effort to identify the person or persons responsible for the demise of Peggy. If you have any information on this case, please get in touch with Detective George Loguercio at 352-754-6830. On June 21, 2000, in Winter Park, Florida, a citizen saw cats playing with something. He went to see what it was and found a human skull at the Orange County apartment community. The Orange County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene and investigated the area. More skeletal remains, as well as clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small caliber gun was also found near his remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40 and 60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. They extracted DNA from the remains, and in January 2024, Othram identified him as Paul Laurence Larry Rougeux, Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was approximately 40 years old at the time of his demise. Larry was raised in the Winter Park area with his siblings and was a graduate of Orlando's Colonial Park High School. The Orange County Sheriff's Office urges anyone with any information that could help solve the case of Larry Rougeux to contact Detective Lowen at 407-254-7000. On December 12, 1994, skeletal remains of a woman were discovered off Tom Hicken Road in Sugarloaf Township, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, during a mining reclamation project. A state worker found her and saw her skeleton was scattered between the top and bottom of a coal bank. She was left above ground with no evidence of burial. A foreign metal fragment was located in the lower jaw. Authorities responded to the scene and determined that the remains were that of a female who was approximately 5 foot 1 inches to 5 foot 4 inches tall. It was estimated that she was between the ages of 34 and 47 years at the time of her demise, and that she had lost her life between 6 months to 2 years prior to being found. Despite extensive efforts, including comparisons and leads, the identity of the woman remained a mystery due to the condition of the remains, which rendered determining a cause and manner of demise impossible. There was a model of her face that forensic artist Frank Bendor made after studying her skull in 1996. The sculpture, circulated widely in the media, was one attempt to identify her over the years. She became known as Sugarloaf Jane Doe. Unfortunately, the case went cold. In 2021, authorities released a computer-generated likeness of the unknown victim and offered a reward for any information. Through recent advancements in DNA technology and forensic genealogy, a possible relative of this unidentified woman was discovered by Othram. Investigators say they interviewed the relative and an additional DNA sample was obtained, confirming the relative was her sister. In February 2024, after nearly 3 decades, state police reported that the unidentified woman was positively identified as Margaret Carol Wininger. She was born on September 5, 1948 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. She was living with her family in northeast Philadelphia until she went missing in the early 1990s. Margaret attended West Hazleton High School from 1965 to 1966. She was maid of honor for a wedding at Our Lady of Grace R.C. Church in 1968. Her parents divorced in 1965, and her father had been a greenskeeper at Valley Country Club. Her sister joined the Women's Army Corps after high school. While the identification of Margaret brings some closure, the investigation into her tragic end is ongoing. State police are urging anyone who may have come into contact with her in the Luzerne County area during that time to come forward with any information. In a statement, State Police Trooper Brian Knoll said, "Although 30 years old, this investigation was never set aside. And with the advancements in technology, troopers persisted with the investigation. As with any cold case, members of the Pennsylvania State Police will never give up and always strive to conduct a thorough investigation, serving the people of this Commonwealth to the highest level." Trooper Brian Knoll from the Pennsylvania State Police Troop Criminal Investigation Assessment Unit can be reached at 570-220-8475. On May 24, 1985, the remains of an unidentified male were discovered in a vacant lot near Gibsonton, Florida. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. It was determined that the man lost his life due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was between the ages of 40 and 60 years at the time of his end. He was likely 5 foot 6 inches to 5 foot 10 inches tall. Investigators also found several articles of clothing and other personal items at the scene. A forensic composite was developed and released to the public in hopes that it would generate leads about the man's identity. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, as UP207. Despite investigators' best efforts, the man could not be identified, and the case went cold. In 2023, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office teamed with Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help to identify the man. The investigation led them to possible relatives of the unknown man, whose disappearance in the mid-1980s had left no digital footprint for the last 40 years. Detectives traveled to Knoxville, Tennessee in January 2024, where they met with a family member of the man and matched his DNA with the decedent's from 1985. The man was identified in 2024 as Mr. Charles Allen Ray, born in 1936. He was an honorable veteran of the United States Navy. Chief Deputy Joe Maurer of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office said, "We were able to establish a link to Mr. Ray and his family, so we were able to bring closure to his family. For nearly 40 years, his family had no idea what happened to Mr. Ray." Advancements in technology, especially in the criminal justice realm, have furthered our abilities to solve crimes. On December 20, 1987, a woman's remains were found by a passerby walking a dog near the intersection of 130th Avenue and 72nd Court, north of Royal Palm Beach in Florida. The autopsy report showed that she was in her 20s to 30s and had brown hair with gray streaks. She had been there for a long period of time, and foul play was suspected. No clothing or jewelry were with the remains. She could have suffered from severe arthritis or a back injury, and she had a fracture on the right clavicle. Shortly after her remains were found, authorities released a forensic sketch of what the victim may have looked like, but they got no leads and it became a cold case. In 2023, thanks to a grant from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, PBSO submitted forensic evidence to Othram to identify the woman. In February 2024, 36 years later, Othram identified her as Pati Lisa Loguercio Rust from Lauderdale by the Sea in Broward County, Florida. She was born in 1960. Her parents were Elizabeth B. English and Anthony Loguercio, and she had two brothers, Stephen and Anthony. She married Kenneth Allen Rust on November 11, 1984, and then went missing in 1986. Connor Ward, a resident of Palm Beach, said, "I am happy they found whoever that was. I think it is pretty cool that technology has come such a long way where they can just figure out who a person is just by facial recognition or DNA structures or stuff like that." Stuart Kaplan, a former FBI agent who now works as a defense attorney in Palm Beach, said, "The first thing now is you have a name, you have a person. The first thing I would do is obviously reach out to the family." Kaplan says detectives will likely try to interview anyone who is close to Pati, such as her husband or ex-husband, her siblings, a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, best friend, and her former co-workers. PBSO is asking anyone with information on Pati to contact Detective John Cogburn at 561-688-4063. Two fishermen discovered a body of a man in a drainage area on a freight property in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, in October 2003. He had no identification, and his description did not match any reports of missing people in the area. An autopsy was performed, and it was determined that there was no trauma to the body, and that the cause was drowning. The manner could not be determined, police said. He was between 30 and 40 years of age. Bensalem police compared the unknown man to numerous missing person reports over the next 19 years without success. He was buried beneath a marker bearing a placeholder name in the Doylestown Cemetery while attempts to identify him continued. A former Bensalem Township police detective and cold case investigator, McMullen, 54, became preoccupied with finding a modern way to solve open-ended cases. In 2022, he founded Cold Case Initiative, a nonprofit that helps fund such investigations, which can be expensive. In December 2022, Bensalem police obtained hair samples from the Bucks County Coroner's Office that were collected at the autopsy. The samples were sent to a private laboratory, which obtained a DNA profile. The funding was received from Cold Case Initiative. In October 2023, the search and subsequent investigation led investigators to speak with a man that said his son went missing around the time the body was found. He provided a DNA sample and it was a match. The body was then identified as Edward Anthony Nece. "This one is our first solve," McMullen said Tuesday. "We are so excited." Edward's father, 75, a retired diesel mechanic, said that these days he is still feeling foggy, a little confused about it all. "I waited 20 years for word about my son," he said. He and his former wife would go to police stations to file missing persons reports and to check in to learn whether officers had picked up any clues. This was before cell phone days, when you could maybe find someone, he said. He added that the spot where his son was found was not far from his home. "I just found it extremely hard to believe someone could go missing less than a mile from your house, and it takes 2 decades to find out," he said. "I do not know what to say. I have felt relief, but sadness. But then I get to have closure. He was buried properly. His mother and I have been up to the cemetery, and we changed that nameplate from an unknown to his name. We are now in the process of putting up a gravestone." Edward, who was 31 when his body was discovered, had worked as a forklift operator at a trucking firm in Delenco. He was really happy, making real good money. Things were going well for him. The Bensalem police said, "We would like to recognize the diligent effort of Bensalem Township Police Department detectives and the Cold Case Initiative Partnership. Without their assistance, the family of Edward Anthony Nece would still be wondering what happened to their loved one." While the man has been identified, officials have not said if they have determined a manner of demise or if any foul play was involved.